Welcome to my tent, Your Highness. I see you glancing around for my guards. You'll find none. You are wondering if the wine or bread offered to you is poisoned. It isn't. You're wondering if I am armed. I am not. You're wondering if it's a trick to make you trust me. It isn't. I told you and your men that you are safe here, and I am a man of my word. Not quite like you. You were asked to come unarmed. I count at least 4 blades on your person, and I have no doubt that you could kill me just as easily without them. I will skip most of the pleasantries. I'm an old man now, even if I don't look it, and you are easily bored and despise your time being wasted. Even I have heard of your exploits. My people, may range far from the Central Sea, but the word of your exploits have traveled far, just as you have likely heard of mine. You don't need to pretend to know who I am. My name hasn't reached your ears. I make a point to make sure that my exploits are under many names, so even if you hear about my victories and stories, you would not realize it was done by me. I prefer it this way. Better for the world to have many heroes than to have only one. As to why you have been invited to my tent, I know that you need my people's help, and we need yours. However, the traditional ways of helping each other just won't work. I have no interest in marrying you, nor adopting you, and my grandchildren have no interest in marrying you either. Besides, I've seen both of your husbands. They would come to quarrel with all of my children. Still, we need an alliance of sorts while assisting each other, not to have you answering to me, nor I to you. I have heard your proposal to my grandson. It is a clever proposal. You just made the mistake of offering it to him. He doesn't view the world the way you and I do. He still believes the Fae are only stories. He still believes that death is the end. And he still believes there is nothing west of Oceanus. So, here are my terms. I will agree to your proposal in full. I only ask that you hear my story tonight, and in the morning, after I tell everyone that I agree, I ask that you take your ship and you escort me and my family to the island just off the coast. Sound fair? My own grandfather came from an island far from here, a place of cold, rainy forests, where they still used bone and stone to kill. The bronze that you and your warriors wielded were nothing more than distant rumors. What I know most about the land my grandfather came from was that they didn't bury, burn, nor eat their dead. They left the dead to rot above the ground until they were reduced to bones. Then the bones were burnt in big bone fires, with the exception of the skulls. Those were used to mark the boundaries of the clan lands. This practice was used for a long time, until one night, beneath a stormy night with strange red lightning, did the dead return to visit us. The bodies that were left out to rot sat up straight and made their way back to our villages and towns. The dead were hungry and began to feast on our harvest, our store of food, and our livestock. They drank our wine, beer, and water, but no matter how much they drank and ate, the dead were hungry, and our people, our living people, I should say, did not know what to do. We left our offerings for our ancestors like we were supposed to every Samhain night. We left offerings for the Fae. We burned the bones like we were supposed to. Still, the ghosts and dead returned to life to eat all that we had. The living could not eat. The dead were ravenous, and when we tried to eat the food, the dead would simply remove our hands, using their blades of stone and bone to cut our hands. calling us thieves while we slowly starved, watching the dead deplete our food stores. Removed from our homes by the dead who demanded our homes, our beds, and our hearts, leaving us out in the cold and the dark, scrambling for what we could in the darkness. My great-grandfather, a wise druid, tried to speak to the dead prince, a strong and dead man who wore a crown of copper that turned his gray skin green where it touched his skin. The druid asked the dead prince to consider the living, that the living were going to die by the cruelty of the dead. The dead prince had the druid's tongue, hands, and feet removed. Then the dead tore into his body, leaving not even enough flesh for the crows or ants to eat. My grandfather's people were scared. They did everything they were told to. They respected the laws of life and death. They respected the boundaries of every fairy circle, and they acted with integrity, but the dead were displacing the living. My grandfather, horrified by what he saw, had terrifying nightmares that night. A nightmare that I know very well, because I had the same nightmare. He saw darkness in the land, something that infected the dead lying on the land, only for that darkness to spread through the very air the dead spoke with, rising above them like a great fog, covering the sky in the dark clouds that all saw above him. He saw the clouds spreading and growing, with the dead beneath it marching out like a great flood, wiping away every village, every town, every camp, every tent, until the entire world was the same ravenous, unholy dead that haunted them. I can see in your eyes, you have seen visions of this same pestilence, and you know how to prevent it. My grandfather, when he woke up from his nightmare, assembled all the people of the clan, men, women, and children, and had them all make masks. Fearsome masks of the monsters, spirits, fae, and beasts. A mask to make the dead fear what lay in otherworld, to make the dead afraid, and to disguise the living from the dead. When all were masked, my grandfather led the clan back to the village, and then went to every house, one by one. They would knock on the doors, and when the dead saw the terrible visage of the living's masks, they cowered in their homes. The clan would remove the heads of the dead, throwing the still moving heads into a large fire in the center of town, taking the stored food of the dead for themselves, returning their own homes to themselves. Every dead man with his head removed meant that the skies above grew a little clearer, and it took all night, but eventually when the last of the dead were decapitated, the dead prince, the skies above cleared for the first time in weeks, and my grandfather's clan could finally see the moon for the first time. My grandfather enjoyed peace for a while, but then news reached the village of neighboring clans. They too had the storms, and the dead were returning to do as they did in life. One of the most consistent things with the dead was them being dangerous, even if they are not always dangerous in the same way. For one clan, the dead stalked their roads and trails, attacking everyone on the roads. Everyone except the thieves. The thieves were left alive, but everyone else was eviscerated, their still moving corpses left hanging from the trees, as a warning that the dead owned those roads. Their goods stolen by the dead, but for what reason, no one seemed to know. Not even the dead seemed to know what to do with their treasure. They simply gathered it in a big pile in the middle of the wilds. Everyone who died in that clan's land joined the dead highwaymen, and all gathered the stolen goods onto that pile. Which was how my grandfather found the dead highwaymen. The pile of treasure had grown so large that it could be seen above the trees, so my grandfather's soldiers and him wore their masks again, causing the highwaymen to cower and freeze before them, leaving them free for decapitation and a return to their final rest. When the last of the dead highwaymen died for a second time, the storm passed and the curse on the land was broken. For another clan, the dead were seeking their lost loved ones. Family members, pets, old friends. One dead man, my grandfather remembered clearly, kept calling out for his dog, despite the fact that the dog had died long before the man did. And for some strange reason, only people came back from death, not the animals. When these dead found their lost loved ones, they would slowly tear them apart, slowly carving up their loved ones, chewing their flesh raw, watching themselves destroy the ones they loved, with no care left in their dead hearts. The only love that those dead had was hunger and possession. When these dead were destroyed, many of their loved ones decided to join them soon after. The sight of what they had done was too much for most of their hearts to bear. Every clan freed from the grips of that dead curse joined my grandfather in his quest of ridding the world of the dead. From leading a war band to commanding an army, to leading a coalition to commanding an empire, my grandfather gradually rid the island of the infection, only to see that it had spread into the mainland. My grandfather considered whether he should protect his island or try to lead an invasion of the mainland. His dreams showed him a vision of Oceanus crashing into the beaches of his island. Every wave, every stray gust, every drop of water gradually washing away the island into the sea. No matter how much my grandfather tried to hold the sand in his hands, it was all washed away, leaving him struggling to stay afloat in the ocean, only to have the waves drag him down into the darkness. The next day he led a flotilla into Gaul. While crossing the channel between Albion and Gaul, the dead beneath the waves crawled onto my grandfather's boats. The waterlogged, soggy ghouls climbed up the sides of the boats. Every ghoul that was pushed back into the sea was replaced by two more. They climbed over each other, soon filling the channel. So the boats were balanced on the hands, mouths, and bodies of the dead with a thin layer of water, while the warriors desperately tried to decapitate them. When the first boat was overloaded with the bodies of the dead, the boat slipped beneath the waves. The dead were so plentiful that no one who fell into the waves rose above the water. Drowned and torn apart by the dead who separated Albion and Gaul. Still, when my grandfather realized that the drowned dead were too plentiful to fight, he ordered the rest of his clan to Gaul's shores. One by one, the dozens of boats were dragged under. Only my grandfather's boat survived, him and a dozen clan members. On the shore, the dead began to follow him out of the surf. My grandfather and his men ran beyond the edges of the beach, where skulls faced the channel, where the dead couldn't step over the boundaries marked by the skulls. Once safe, my grandfather and his men took their slings and arrows to dispatch the dead, just beyond the boundary. When the dozens of dead were killed, the local members of the Gaelic tribe saw his victory and welcomed my grandfather in. My grandfather spent a full year with the tribe, trying to convince them to fight dead beyond their boundaries. This tribe used bronze metal, and my grandfather learned a lot from them and also cemented an alliance by marrying into the clan, marrying my grandmother, and learning how the dead and Fae were different in Gaul than they were in Albion. The dead in Gaul were harsher than they were in Albion. Entire cities were owned by the dead, and the dead sought glory. Unlike Albion, the animals who were buried alongside their dead masters returned with them. It seemed like that the dead would have completely taken over Gaul by now, if not for the fact that the dead seemed to fight each other even more than they fought the living. When my father was born, my grandfather had built coalitions to try and rid the cities of the dead. By taking tactics and strategies that he took from both Gaul and Albion, he led the clans in victory over the dead. Wearing masks kept the dead cowering, and when cities were full of dead, that it would take weeks or even months to clear out by decapitation, my grandfather would set the cities on fire. When my father was old enough to start fighting, and my grandfather realized how large Gaul was, he adopted the survivors he found into the clans he was building. The storms kept pushing south, and my grandfather and father followed it. Soon after my birth, they found the Gallic city of Parisi, one of the largest cities they had ever found in Gaul. Burning the city wasn't enough. In the quarries, mines, and labyrinthian tunnels beneath the city, where the dead were thrown, it couldn't be burned. So my father went into the catacombs beneath Parisi with 300 of his men. My father returned dead, now leading all of the dead in the catacombs, carrying weapons of iron that they got from their infernal allies, as my now dead father fought my grandfather. My father and his men were immune from the terror of the masks, and my father's clarity of vision let him see more than normal dead men did. Only after a week-long battle did my grandfather finally overcome my father, removing his head and chasing the rest of the dead back into the catacombs, where my grandfather sealed them inside with the skulls of their fallen, their eyes still watching over the ghouls until they completely rotted, and their empty sockets still watching. My grandfather, realizing that he was nearly overcome by the iron weapons, had his smiths, druids, and miners work to try and reproduce those weapons. When I was finally old enough to fight, we were able to make and wield our own iron weapons. And when I was old enough to make my own stories, did I see how much our stories hid. Not lies, nor omissions, but just the parts that my grandfather couldn't explain to most people. How every time the warriors wore their masks, I realized we had more warriors in the battle than we had before the battle started, and more than we had afterwards. Warriors who were also horrifying to look at, but who didn't look like they were wearing masks, even if their faces resembled our masks. Warriors who didn't wield iron, but weapons of silver and bronze. I saw these warriors obey my grandfather's command with the same ease as everyone else during the battle. But when the battle was over, it was my grandfather who obeyed them. I also saw what I later called the clarity in someone's eyes. A lot of the warriors didn't see the dead as just that, dead. Their eyes were almost clouded over and glassy as they fought the dead. When they did talk about fighting, the dead were just another warrior, another enemy, maybe wild animals. The strange, the fantastical, and the immaterial simply weren't there for them. The ghouls were strange warriors and wild animals. The storms above us were just clouds. The lightning was unseen. The spreading corruption was nothing more than a normal pestilence. And these were some of the lucky men. We had found clans, towns, and even cities where everyone inside couldn't see the dead, not even as they broke down their homes and tore them apart. The blinded living unseeing to the dead around them, not because they couldn't see, but because they chose not to see, believing it couldn't harm them if they ignored it. They were wiped out, the dead tearing them apart long before we could get close to them. As clouded over as most of the warriors were, at least they understood that the threat was a threat. They were willing to fight back rather than let it consume them. But you couldn't talk to them about the dead. If you tried to tell them, they either thought you were lying or that you were trying to harm them. More than once, I tried to tell normally brave men what monsters they were truly fighting, only to watch them burst into tears and collapse into fits. So my grandfather showed me that I would have to tell the truth to most of the warriors in a way that they could understand. In stories, most men cannot handle the idea that the world is bigger than the physical, but they can understand that a story can have ghosts. They may not understand that dead men were walking, but they could hear stories about them. The truth was in those stories, and could teach them how to fight and how to survive, and some part of them, no matter how small, would hold on to those stories and apply those lessons where they traveled. And that is why those who saw the clearest, like my grandfather and I, joined the druids, the bards, skalds, and fili, going from clan to clan, land to land, sharing these stories, feats, and songs. The stories may shift, the names may change, and the locations as well, so that way the clans would understand better. But their role was ultimately to stir up others to take up arms and fight back as well. To understand that there were monsters in the world, even if they thought of them as metaphors and not real. To understand in some way that the stories had lessons, that the lessons were important, and even if they weren't trying to learn, that they were, even as they listened. Even as they convinced themselves that the storyteller wasn't talking to them directly. Even when they believed that feeling of being watched was just a chill. Even when the listeners believe it is only another story to enjoy and fall asleep to, they would learn the lessons, and they would remember. When the monsters come, you will fight back. The stories told of monsters in the wilds and dangers in the darkness, but it also told the importance of bringing them to light and how to drive them away. I don't know how far they traveled, but I do believe that their stories went as far as they needed to go, and went even further. By the time I had my own child, my grandfather was on his deathbed. My grandfather, upon his deathbed, passed on his responsibilities, his titles, his burdens, and his power onto me. As he died, we shaved his beard, cut his nails, and when he passed on, we buried him in a mound alongside his favorite weapon. His name, Lugh, carved in stone and placed on the mound. He was truly blessed, for he did not return back to the cursed half-life like many others. When I took over from my grandfather, I learned the only art more difficult than war was the art of politics. So many meetings had to happen over a feast. So many kings, queens, princes, princesses, and chieftains had to be convinced to fight with us. A few of them saw with clarity as well and could be convinced with ease. Others had clouded eyes and could only see the dead as another rambunctious clan, something to ignore or quietly put in its place. Those took a lot more convincing. Promises made, promises kept, and even occasional blackmail to keep the army going. Then there were the leaders who could see no dead, who saw no threats out in the world beyond. I didn't bother trying to explain anything to them. It was a greater mercy to let the dead consume the kings who refused to see, and to lead those who wanted to fight to a new land and a new clan. The warriors in the army had been replaced many times over, eventually growing old, going home, dying, or just vanishing into the night. Upon my grandfather's death, he was the last warrior from Albion. Upon my grandson's birth, I was the last warrior born in Gaul. Everyone else was from Iberia or other strange foreign lands. During the rare times when we weren't fighting, I looked over the soldiers I had and would get awashed in strange nostalgia. Warriors talking about beautiful women back home, discussing their favorite ways to cook food, sharing stories of fairy, arguing over which weapon was the best, stories about distant places in front of us, stories of distant places behind us. And I know in my heart that this is what my father and grandfather saw before me. It's what I see now with my daughter and my grandson. For over 100 years now, my clan has been building an army and fighting this entire time. Homes cleaned from the dead as clans moved from place to place. Fighting for me for a time before finding a new home to settle, traveling farther than they ever would have been if they stayed farmers, hunters, or craftsmen. Through my warriors and my bards, I am building an army of thousands, or even millions, against the dead. An army with many generals, a history with many bards. Everywhere we go, the world changes. Whether it is a better world or a worse world, it is a world for the living. So, why am I asking to speak to you? Well, we are getting close to Tartessos, and we can see how numerous the dead are. I will not live to see Tartessos cleansed of the dead, and I know that my end draws near. I have heard the banshees' wails, I have seen the man on the pale horse, and I have seen the island west of Iberia, the island that the clouded cannot see. My children, my grandchildren, their eyes are all clouded. They still believe that we are fighting for golden glory. There is no one that I can leave my army to when I pass. They do not see, so they will fall to the dead. It may take hours, it may take years, but they will fall to the dead, and they will join them. But when I saw you and your husbands, your eyes are clear, possibly clearer than mine. You see the dead for what they are, and you see the island. You are someone I can leave my army to. But I cannot simply declare a princess like you as my heir, not without some uncomfortable marriages or adoptions. Your proposal is short and simple. You wish to hire my men to fight for you. In life, they would not be interested in being hired. But if I was to die and disband my army with me, I ask you, dearest friend, tomorrow morning, take my family and I to the island. Show them that the island is real. let me pass away on the island. When that is done, hopefully my family will see well enough to see the wisdom in working for you. Perhaps a proper alliance can be made, and if one cannot be made, then I know that my daughter is quite interested in leading her men as a mercenary. My grandson will listen. My descendants, both in blood and by adoption, will be welcome to the island where I am buried. I will be a place for respite for their journey to Otherworld. When day came, I took King Dunn and his family to the island. The island, a foggy and shadowy place, was where Dunn died. His family shaved his beard, cut his nails, and then removed his head before burying his body, leaving the skull on top of the mound to forever act as a warden over Dunn's island. As I brought Dunn's family back, I could see it in their eyes. Their eyes were clouded and misty when they were brought to the island. Even with their patriarch dying, it was unreal to them. Leaving the island, they could see clearly, and it terrified them.